The Deep Dive, everyone. I am your host, and today we are getting into something that honestly completely challenged my perspective.
Hi, everyone. I'm the resident expert here, and yeah, I think this one is going to surprise a lot of people. It's a wild ride.
It really is. So, to start, I want you, the listener, to just imagine standing in the freezing, jagged peaks of the Pamir Mountains, like roughly 2,500 years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah, just dropping right into it.
Right into it. So you are stepping inside this enclosed, dimly lit tomb, and in the center of the space, someone has placed these carved wooden bowls.
Right.
Inside the bowls are river stones, and they've been heated in a roaring fire until they are just like glowing.
Superheated stones.
Exactly. And then a figure steps forward and throws a handful of raw, dried plant matter directly onto those stones. Instantly, the room fills with this incredibly thick, heavy, fragrant smoke.
Which would just overwhelm the senses immediately.
Totally. You inhale, and within minutes, the physical world starts to kind of slip away. Now, you aren't in a modern dispensary, right? And you aren't in the middle of some political debate.
No, not at all.
You are participating in one of the most solemn, profound funeral rites of the ancient world.
That imagery, it perfectly captures the vast disconnect between our present moment and deep human history.
It really does. So the source material we are examining today, it's a set of notes provided by Nug Notes, and it's titled China's Ma, the First Cannabis Story.
Yeah, and this source really forces us to bridge that exact disconnect. Because if we look at the scientific data, specifically fossil pollen records, it points us directly to the areas near Qinghai Lake and the Tibetan Plateau.
Right, like the deep origin zone.
Exactly, the deep origin zone for this plant. And modern genetic studies corroborate this entirely. They place East Asia right at the center of its early domestication.
Which is just wild to think about. Okay, let's unpack this. Because for you listening, our mission on this deep dive is to completely strip away the 21st century.
Highly necessary for this topic.
Yeah, we have to drop the binary arguments, the modern legislation, the pop culture stereotypes. We are traveling back thousands of years to explore how early humans interacted with a plant that they didn't view as some controversial commodity.
Right, they viewed it as a fundamental technology for survival.
Yes, a literal backbone of human survival.
And to really grasp that, you have to picture the material reality of an ancient Chinese agricultural landscape. Before an empire can build massive administrative bureaucracies or, write sweeping philosophies.
Because people simply have to not die.
Exactly. They have to survive. They have to survive freezing winters. They need to hunt. They need to pull food from the rivers.
And the raw material that allowed them to do that was a plant the ancient Chinese called ma.
Right, ma, which is the ancient word for hemp.
And the Nug Notes source material makes a massive point to emphasize that this was the ultimate utilitarian crop.
It wasn't just quote-unquote weed.
No, not at all. We are talking about the raw fiber used to weave the clothes on their backs, the shoes they wore to walk across these rugged terrains.
The thick ropes for building.
Yeah, and the intricate nets for fishing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was even the material they used to string their bows.
Which is such a crazy detail. But that bowstring, it's actually a perfect window into the physical mechanics of why this plant was so vital.
How so?
Well, hemp is a bast fiber. That means the fibers run the entire length of the plant's stalk.
Okay.
And when you process them, these fibers have an incredibly high tensile strength. And crucially, they do not stretch when they're pulled taut.
Oh, which is exactly what you need for a bow.
Right. If you are fashioning a bow for hunting or defense, you need a string that can store and release kinetic energy without losing its shape.
Because if it snaps under pressure, you're in huge trouble.
Exactly. Animal sinew can stretch or degrade depending on the weather or the moisture, but hemp fiber holds true.
Wow. So it is essentially the prehistoric equivalent of carbon fiber.
That is a great way to put it.
It's like you have this material that is lightweight, organically grown, but it possesses this phenomenal structural integrity. It's the duct tape of the ancient world.
It's the duct tape of antiquity, yeah.
But it goes beyond just building materials and tools, right? Because the notes also mention it was literally keeping people alive calorically.
Yes, the nutritional profile is really what elevated it from just a useful weed to a foundational crop. In early China, hemp was explicitly counted among some of the earliest 5 grains lists.
Wait, so it was considered a staple food?
Absolutely.
Right.
The seed is incredibly dense in proteins and calories, And the oil they extracted from it was a huge resource.
That is fascinating.
And being included on a 5 grains list, that's a monumental distinction. It means the state and the populace have recognized this plant as a critical pillar of their economy.
Right, because you don't just forage for a 5-grain crop in the woods.
No, you clear land for it, you protect it, you study it.
So it's like the duct tape and the soybean of antiquity just rolled into one single stalk.
Yeah, exactly.
You plant a field of ma, and you harvest your hunting gear, your winter coat, your fishing net, and your dinner.
It's the ultimate multi-tool.
But, here's where my skepticism kind of kicks in.
Oh.
Yeah, because to get all of those different products, especially the really high-quality fibers for bowstrings or textiles, you can't just throw seeds in the dirt and cross your fingers.
Right. Agriculture takes immense skill.
And the notes mention we have evidence of hemp fiber in textiles dating back over 5,000 years. But by the time we get to the later agronomic texts, it says farmers are selectively managing male and female plants.
Yes.
How on earth does an ancient farmer without a microscope or any modern understanding of genetics even know that a plant has a gender, let alone how to exploit it?
I mean, the short answer is through relentless generational observation. Cannabis is a dioecious species.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning it naturally produces distinct male and female organisms. A lot of the staple crops we rely on today, like wheat or corn, they don't operate that way. But ancient farmers, they noticed that certain plants in their fields produced flowers and died off quickly, while others lived longer and produced seeds. They basically deduced the reproductive cycle.
That is incredible.
But more impressively, they figured out the metabolic mechanisms of the plant. They realized that if a female plant gets pollinated, it diverts almost all of its metabolic energy into producing seeds.
Oh, I see. So the stalk stops growing.
Exactly. The fibers probably become shorter or weaker because the plant is putting all its effort into reproducing.
So if your goal is to harvest the longest, strongest bast fibers for your ropes and your clothes, you need the plant to keep pushing its energy into the stalk.
Precisely. So
Yeah.
these ancient agronomic texts, they document farmers intentionally walking the fields, identifying the male plants, and rooping them out before they could release any pollen.
Wow, they were artificially interrupting the reproductive cycle.
Yes, to force the unpollinated female plants to grow taller, which yielded superior industrial fibers. It is a staggering level of applied biological science.
It really is. So you have this massive, highly optimized agricultural engine churning out hemp for clothes and ropes across the central
A
heartland,
huge industry, yeah.
which creates a really interesting logistical problem. Because if you are processing that much fibrous stock, you are inevitably generating just mountains of scrap material.
Oh, tons of it.
Yeah, offcuts, damaged fibers, the leftovers from making, thousands of pairs of shoes. What do you do with all that waste?
Well, you pulp it.
Okay.
And that leads to one of the most consequential technological leaps in human history.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, the source details that during the Han era, which dates from roughly 140 to 86 BCE, this exact hemp waste was being processed into early paper.
Wait, I need to pause you there. Because we always hear about papyrus in Egypt, or, we think of paper as coming from modern timber and wood pulp.
Right. Modern paper is mostly wood.
So how do you physically take a tough, rigid hemp stalk, the same stuff used for a bowstring, and turn it into a delicate sheet of paper you can write on?
It requires a really specific process called retting. You can't just smash a dry stalk into paper. It wouldn't work.
Makes sense.
So the ancient Chinese would take these hemp scraps and submerge them in water, like a slow-moving river or a dedicated soaking pond.
Okay.
And you leave it there until bacteria literally begins to rot away the pectin. Pectin is basically the cellular glue that holds the plant's rigid structure together.
So they basically let it rot.
Controlled rotting, yeah. Once the pectin breaks down, you are left with pure, incredibly durable cellulose fibers.
Wow.
Then you take those softened fibers, you pound them with wooden mallets into this wet fibrous mush. You suspend that mush in a vat of water and dip a flat screen into it.
Ah, and then you pull the screen up.
Exactly. The water drains away, the cellulose fibers interlock with each other, and once it dries, you have a sheet of hemp paper.
That is just brilliant. And think about what that means for the Han Dynasty.
It changed everything.
You have this massive, expanding empire, and an empire runs on taxes, on military orders, on census data.
Yes, you need records.
Before paper, what were they using? They were writing on heavy, cumbersome strips of bamboo or incredibly expensive silk.
Right, imagine moving a library of bamboo. It requires a whole fleet of wooden carts.
But moving a library of hemp paper, that requires a single messenger with a satchel.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the administrative capability of the state just exploded.
Right.
By transforming agricultural waste into a medium for written language, Ma became the physical substrate of history.
The very plant that fed the populace and clothed the army was now literally carrying the laws and literature of the empire.
Across vast, vast distances.
So in the Eastern agricultural heartland, the plant represents order, right? It is deeply practical. It's your food, your clothes, your bureaucracy.
Very structured.
But the nug notes material makes a hard pivot here, because as this empire expands, the geography changes and the entire cultural identity of the plant just flips.
Completely flips.
When we move away from the central heartlands and head out to the rugged western frontiers, like Xinjiang and the Pamir region, we leave the realm of paper and administration entirely.
We do. We enter the realm of the spiritual.
Tell me about that.
So the archaeological record from these frontier zones provides the strongest evidence of the psychoactive, ritualistic use of cannabis in the ancient world.
Which is a huge contrast.
Huge. These regions were the vital arteries connecting China with Central Asia, Iranian cultures, and the vast Eurasian steppe.
A completely different environment.
Exactly, a rugged, harsh environment. And the way the people interacted with the local botany reflected a deeply different set of cultural priorities.
The archaeological sites mentioned in the notes are just phenomenal. Like, you have the Yanghai Cemetery near Turpan, which dates back about 2,700 years.
Right.
And archaeologists found a large cache of cannabis buried alongside a high-status individual there. The context clearly points away from fiber or food and heavily toward medicinal or ritual use.
Yes. But the discovery that really stops you in your tracks is the Jai burial.
Oh, yeah. They excavated a tomb and found nearly completely intact cannabis plants arranged so carefully over a human body.
Covering it entirely like a botanical shroud.
Yes, a botanical shroud. And this is exactly where I think we have to fiercely push back on modern stereotypes. Because when someone today hears the phrase psychoactive cannabis, their brain immediately defaults to modern recreational culture.
Right, the image of someone trying to check out, get high, maybe watch television.
But look at the physical reality of the Jai burial. Meticulously laying intact, potent plants over a deceased loved one before sealing them in the earth.
That is not a prehistoric party.
No, it is the equivalent of a modern military funeral where an honor guard meticulously drapes a national flag over a casket.
That's a profound analogy.
It is a gesture of ultimate solemn reverence. They are equipping the dead for a profound transition.
And the evidence from the Xinjiang site, which is high in the Pamirs, around 500 BCE, it provides the exact physical mechanism for how these spiritual transitions were facilitated.
Right. This brings us back to that vivid scene we discussed at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Exactly. Archaeologists didn't just find seeds or stalks there. They found those wooden braziers.
The bowls with the stones.
Yes. Inside these braziers were stones exhibiting clear signs of intense heat exposure. And clinging to those stones were the burned chemical residues of psychoactive cannabis.
Which means they understood the physics of the hot box.
They absolutely did. Think about it. If you just throw a psychoactive plant on an open campfire out on a windy steppe,
the smoke just instantly dissipates into the atmosphere. The active compounds are completely lost.
Right, but if you superheat stones, carry them into a small enclosed space like a burial tent or a stone tomb, and drop the flower directly onto the heat source,
the plant material vaporizes instantly.
Instantly. You trap a massive concentration of active botanical compounds in a confined airspace.
Which forces a communal experience.
Yes. The mourners inside that space are inhaling a dense, psychoactively potent smoke while collectively grieving.
Wow.
It is a calculated physical technology used to induce an altered state of consciousness. They were utilizing the plant's chemical properties to essentially thin the veil between the living and the dead.
To process grief or communicate with the spiritual realm during a funeral rite.
This raises an important question, though, because these discoveries are located along the ancient trade routes.
Right, the Silk Road areas.
Yeah, and it totally recontextualizes how we view the exchange of human ideas. We tend to think of the steppe trade routes just as highways for moving physical commodities.
Like silk goes one way, bronze goes the other, maybe some spices are traded in the middle.
Exactly. But a movement of goods is always accompanied by the movement of ideas.
Right.
These frontier zones were intensely active cultural melting pots. Nomadic steppe riders, settled Iranian cultures, and Chinese merchants were all colliding in these rugged passes.
And when they interacted, they weren't just bartering over the price of hemp ropes.
No, they were observing each other's rituals. They were exchanging spiritual technologies and profound botanical knowledge.
Which sets up an incredible intellectual collision.
It really does.
You have this single empire. On the eastern side, you have highly organized farmers meticulously pulling up male hemp plants to optimize fiber for bureaucratic paper and sturdy shoes.
Very grounded, very administrative.
But then, on the far western frontier, you have communities vaporizing the psychoactive flowers of that exact same plant on red-hot stones to commune with the dead.
The exact same plant.
So how does the intellectual class of ancient China, like the doctors, the scholars, how do they reconcile the fact that the plant fixing their fishing nets is the same plant inducing intense spiritual visions in the mountains?
They turn to their classical medical texts.
Yeah.
And the way they handled this duality is a testament to the sophistication of ancient science.
What did they do?
Well, they didn't try to force the plant into a single restrictive category.
They didn't moralize it.
No, they didn't declare it universally sacred or universally dangerous. Instead, early Chinese medical practitioners carefully compartmentalized the plant's utility based on its specific physical anatomy.
Ah. The source notes perfectly capture this division, actually. It says, the seed remained common. The flower carried power.
That sums it up perfectly. The medical texts documented that the hemp seed was a mundane, everyday item. It was primarily prescribed as a bodily laxative.
Just a normal household remedy.
Exactly. But those same texts explicitly noted that the flowers possessed entirely different properties.
Right.
The flowers could alleviate severe pain, they could induce altered states, and they could trigger visions.
It comes down to a deep understanding of botanical chemistry, doesn't it? Even if they didn't have the modern vocabulary for it.
Absolutely. The seeds are packed with lipids, proteins, and dietary fiber, which is why they work as a digestive aid and a food source.
But the flowers are different.
Very different. They're densely covered in microscopic resin glands, the trichomes, which contain the concentrated psychoactive and analgesic compounds.
So the ancient doctors recognized that a single organism could harbor completely different chemical profiles in its distinct parts.
Oh, they saw the nuance.
It is such a brilliant, practical way to organize the world. Think about it like organizing your own kitchen, right?
Okay, I like this.
Right out in the open, on the counter, you might have a bottle of over-the-counter antacids. Anyone can grab it. It's just a common remedy for a common physical ailment.
Right, that is the ancient hemp seed.
Exactly. But then, locked away, kept on the absolute highest shelf, you have a potent, highly restricted medicine that is only brought down when someone is in agonizing pain or, for a deeply sacred ritual.
And that is the cannabis flower.
Yes. It is the exact same plant growing in the exact same soil, but it is categorized flawlessly by its function.
That ability to hold two truths at once is something modern regulatory frameworks struggle with immensely.
To put it mildly.
Ancient observers respected the totality of the organism.
Yeah.
They understood that a plant is not inherently moral or immoral.
It's just a tool.
It is a complex biological tool. You can weave the shoes you wear to work, and a completely different piece of its anatomy can ease the suffering of the dying.
Wow. So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive with a promise to strip away the noise of the 21st century.
We did.
And by following these notes back to the shores of Qinghai Lake, look at the astonishing narrative we've uncovered. We found an ancient hemp civilization in the East that literally survived by using the tensile strength of a bast fiber to hunt, to clothe its population, and eventually to invent the paper that allowed a massive empire to function.
A completely foundational crop.
And we contrasted that immense practicality with the rugged western frontier, where the volatile chemistry of that exact same plant was weaponized in closed tombs to create a sacred psychoactive space for the grieving.
Understanding this history is crucial for anyone trying to navigate the complex relationship humans have with the natural world today.
Absolutely.
When you look past the rigid categorizations we currently enforce, you realize that our ancestors didn't just passively exist in nature. They actively partnered with it.
They studied it.
They studied its reproductive cycles, they mastered its chemical properties, and they integrated it into every single layer of human existence, from the calories they consumed to the way they buried their dead.
It fundamentally changes how you view the natural resources around us.
It really does.
Because if a single plant that once provided the very paper our ancient history was written on can be reduced to a loud binary political talking point today, What else are we missing?
That is the big question.
Right. What other deeply stigmatized elements of the natural world, whether that is other psychoactive botanicals or entirely misunderstood kingdoms like fungi, might be holding ancient, incredibly practical solutions that we're completely ignoring right now?
Simply because they don't fit the cultural narrative of the current moment.
Exactly. Nature has always provided the multi-tools for human survival. I guess the question is whether we still have the wisdom to look closely enough at the anatomy to know how to use them.